Okay, so I just want to talk somewhat briefly about the behaviour of professional boxers and how, in my view, it impacts the sport or at least their own image. Um, I haven't watched the fight, but just caught the tail end of Tony Bellew versus BJ Flores in Liverpool. Bellew won that. Um, he's certainly seen his star rising, so to speak, since his role in Creed and the win over Fungu Malinga, I think the guy was called. Um, I think Tony Bellew has potential. I think he's potentially a great fighter. He certainly has skill. Um, but anyway, at the end of this fight, he got into verbals with David Hay ringside. Well, actually, it was mostly Tony Bellew mouthing off. Then he actually jumped out of the ring, to get into Hay's face, and it got a little bit out of hand. Nothing major happened. To his credit, David Hay just stood there and kind of was calm. He didn't rise to the bait. There are people saying this was scripted. I don't think it is. I think it's part of Bellew's temperament because the guy's a hothead and he's done this before. So I'm going to put my 50 cents into what I think of this sort of behaviour. Um, I'll be honest. I accept that there are times when trash talking can be relatively entertaining. I'll be brutally honest. I mean, watching Tyson Fury, there's times when it's just so outlandish that you do see the funny side. And that can be said about other fighters as well. And if every fighter behaved like Vladimir Klitschko, it probably would be a little boring. I'm using him as an example because he's an exemplary sportsman. There's other examples, Manny Pacquiao, for instance, Juan Manuel Marquez. Those are guys who are very respectful to their opponents, and that's a great thing. I've always respected those sort of fighters because they behave like professional sportsmen. I acknowledge that when you get the more eccentric fighters, those guys who like to get into trash talking, it can be entertaining. Another example is Shannon Briggs. But what I would say is there's a line. And sometimes, frankly, it makes me cringe when it just seems to be all the time and it seems to be trash talking opponents for the sake of it. Now, bear in mind, this is a week in which a young fighter in Glasgow has died. This is a dangerous sport. It's not a game. Tony Bellew indeed wore a tribute shirt um, to Mike Towell at the beginning of his fight, which was a respectful gesture. I'll give Bellew his credit. I'm not saying the guy is a complete, you know, I'm not saying he doesn't have some redeeming qualities, but far too often Bellew frankly acts like a street thug, and I find it very off-putting. Why? Because I think it's unnecessary. Tony Bellew is a 33-year-old sportsman. It's about time he grew up and started acting like a professional sportsman. I take the view that when someone's in a position of power, they shouldn't abuse it. And in a sense, professional boxers are in a position of power. Why? Because physically they're physically strong. Um, but yeah, they are role models. I know that sounds like a cliche. I know people think that's a boring thing to say, but it is true. Young fighters getting into the sport look up to those guys who are making their name in the sport. Tony Bellew is one such guy. I mean, he's obviously got a lot more recognition since his role in Creed. I mean, to be fair, his role in Creed was the villain, so I suppose that reflects something of his outside life. But he's always had this sort of personality. I've watched his career on and off, and it's nothing new. I've not much time for it because I just think it's unnecessary. In the end of the day, he's getting big, big money for these fights. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it, but I think at the very least, he should try to behave like a professional sportsman. Getting in the people say it's to sell the fight. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Either way, I think it's unnecessary. People might disagree with me, and what bugs me about this is when people call out this sort of behaviour, they come up with this nonsense statement. Oh, it's boxing. What do you expect? They're not in there to have a cup of tea. Yeah, I get that. But when two men fight, they should do it in the ring, okay? The fight shouldn't be outside the ring. Because, frankly, this sort of behaviour, it's no different than what you would see in, with two drunks fighting in Liverpool city centre at night time. But Tony Bellew is supposed to be a professional sportsman. He's supposed to be setting some sort of example. I'm not saying he should be a monk. I'm not saying that every fighter should be super polite, etc. I'm not saying that. But at the very least, there should be some sort of code of conduct. Why? Because he's getting a lot of money for what he does. He's in a position of influence. And it's just, I find it rather tiring, to be honest. I don't find that entertaining. Okay, the verbal jousting can sometimes be entertaining, but when you're actually getting to the point of squaring up to potential opponents and getting into antics outside the ring, it's nonsense. It really is, and I actually take the view that fighters should be fined for that because it's completely unnecessary. It brings the sport into disregard, and it's just unnecessary. You would never see Klitschko behave like that. You would never see Pacquiao behave like that. And there's a lot of other fighters you would never see behave like that. Um, and I know it's nothing new. I know it's been going on since, way, way, way back. But I just think it's unnecessary. If I'm a professional fighter and I'm getting a lot of money for what I do, I'm going to at least try to be a role model. At least try. I'm not saying he should be something he's not. I appreciate every fighter's different. Um, and, I'm not expecting him to be a monk, but at the very least, show some class. That's not classy. That's not even selling a fight. It's just behaving like a dick, to be quite honest. Um, and like I say, Tony Bellew has redeeming qualities. I mean, after the fight with that Congolese guy fought Malinga, I think the guy's name was. To be fair, he went over to his opponent and commiserated with him. So I'm not saying that Tony Bellew doesn't have any redeeming qualities, and I'm not just focusing on him. There's other guys out there. But this sort of antics, I'm thinking, what is the point? I mean, a few years ago, Hay would have behaved like this. But to be fair to David Hay, I think he's growing up in recent years. I haven't seen Hay engage in the sort of antics he used to engage in, and that's good. Um, some people will defend Bellew's behaviour because of the point he was making that Hay is fighting, a low quality of opposition. But regardless of what Bellew thinks of that, regardless if people agree with that, there's a way to go about that. Sign a deal with David Hay to have a fight, then bring it up in press conferences. But you don't do it like that. You don't jump out of the ring and, get into someone's face who it's just stupid. I mean, it's the sort of thing that can provoke a riot, frankly, and then, I've no time for it. So I've made videos before talking about the behaviour of fans, and I stand by that, but I also extend that to fighters themselves. When you're being paid a lot of money for something, it's like any other walk of life. If a politician gets involved in corruption, the public would rightly want them to be punished, to lose their seat, or to be punished. If a police officer abuses his or her authority, people expect them to be held to account. Why should it be any different for a fighter? Just because they are a fighter. Being a fighter doesn't mean behaving like a street thug. It means being a professional sportsman. Because frankly, these sort of antics make it harder to explain to non-boxing fans that this is a professional sport. Anyway, that's my 50 cents. Um, People might say, oh, you wouldn't say this to Bellew's face. That is not the point. Yeah, Bellew could kick my ass, but what's that got to do with it? The point is, as a fan, I want to see fighters behave in a professional manner. And that's not gay. It's just a question of understanding that a certain degree of class is needed. Simple as that. Especially when you consider, and why is respect for opponents important? Because this is a dangerous sport. Bellew's having this tribute T-shirt to Mike Toyle, and then at the very end of the fight, he disrespects David Hay. That's hypocritical. That's totally hypocritical. Because on one hand, he's respecting one fighter, then he's disrespecting another. If he's wearing a t-shirt like that, he should be respecting all fighters. It's completely hypocritical. Um, if I ever get further in the sport, and I have barriers because of my age, um, and other factors, but if I ever do, I hope I will behave, like a professional sportsman. I don't think it's much to ask for, given the money that they're getting. So let me know your thoughts. Incidentally, I'm not going to humour any comments that just want to get into verbal mudslinging. I'll respond to mature, reasonable, civil comments. You could disagree with me as long as you keep it civil.